So we are live, we are recording. Welcome everyone who has showed up, and welcome to those of you who are watching this recording after the event has already taken place live. My name is Chris Hendrix. I am a staff software engineer and developer evangelist here at Blameless, and this is our second SRE Industry Leaders Panel after our reboot, after taking a year. Today we have Jason Fraser and Garima Bajpai. I'd like to start off with introductions. So why don't you tell me, reiterate what's your name and what do you do for work?
Okay, thank you, Chris. And I would like to introduce myself. I'm Garima Bajpai. I'm based out of Ottawa, Canada. I'm the founder for the Community of Practice of DevOps in Canada, which has 3 chapters, Toronto, Ottawa, and Edmonton. I'm also the organizer for the DevOps Summit, which happens in Canada, November 8th and 9th this time. So we welcome you all to join that summit. And I'm also associated with organizations like DevOps Institute as an ambassador, as well as Continuous Delivery Foundation as an ambassador. So I think today we have a great topic and a great panel. So, over to you, Jason, for your introduction.
Cool. Thanks, Garima. Hi, my name is Jason Fraser. I am currently with Tanzu Labs at VMware. That was formerly Pivotal Labs. I'm still sporting the Pivotal logo now and then. I've been with that organization for almost 7 years now, mostly in product management roles. Currently, I'm leading product management and design for the Tanzu Labs public sector team. So I'm doing a lot of work helping federal government, mostly federal government organizations, build successful software labs that can deliver outcomes for the American people. So that's a lot of fun. I was an early proponent of lean startup. I had a company prior to joining Pivotal that developed concepts around lean user experience and helped promote those concepts. So I think that's probably part of why Chris asked me to be here today. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good introduction. So the title of this session is a little bit different than what would maybe be expected for an SRE Industry Leaders Panel. The title of this panel is actually Business Agility is What Matters, but SRE can help you get there. So I chose this topic particularly because I think our attendees, even if they might be ICs in the SRE space, everyone deserves kind of this cross-disciplinary learning and product-oriented practices, innovation, transformation practices all touch the SRE space. And our audience, I think, could really benefit from contextualizing the SRE movement within the history of other big transformational movements. So the name of the talk, like I said, is about agility. So I'd actually like to start there with some maybe foundational information for our audience. A lot of people have heard the term agile, and there's a lot of mistrust these days about what we'd call big A agile. So the agile practices. And that to me is maybe insufficient. So I'd kind of like to roll it back and get to the root of what agility means. Why was agile the term that was coined for these kinds of practices? So maybe let's start. Jason, could you tell us what the agile movement is from and maybe where agility means, what agility means?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, people have been building software for a long time, right? And there are lots of ways to build software successfully. Agile is not the only way to do it. And it's been proven that you can build successful software without doing anything agile. But I think it was in 2001, a group of people got together in Colorado. These were mostly engineers who had been thinking about not just how to write better code, but how to deliver better products, better software products. And they landed on some core principles that you can find in the Agile Manifesto. And if you Google the Agile Manifesto, it's just 4 core statements that are pretty easy that I'm not going to recite off the top of my head because I actually don't remember them now. But you can go look that up. And the purpose behind it was really to, like I said, kind of deliver better outcomes. And I think that the way the Agile movement has proceeded since then, we have demonstrated that you can have a fairly small team deliver very high quality products relatively quickly if you embrace some of these practices and more importantly, the mindsets that go along with the practices. And I'm a fairly pragmatic practitioner of Agile. You know, there's the big A Agile, which for some people is like a scarlet letter A. I think for me, like, if what you are practicing is helping you to deliver the outcomes that you need to deliver for your customers and your business, I don't care if you're doing SAFe. I don't care if you're doing Scrum. I don't care if you're doing XP. Like, none of that matters. It's that you're doing it better than you were doing it before. And I think maybe the final point about Agile is that it sort of stands in antithesis to waterfall development, which has become kind of a curse word now, I think, but I don't know that it has to be. But the way that tools used to be created, software used to be created, was, you know, you would spend a bunch of time writing a spec, you know, identifying requirements, and then you would task someone to build against those requirements, right? And when your process takes 7 to 10 years, and I've got a client right now whose typical process takes 7 to 10 years from concept to delivery, you find that a lot of things are obsolete before you actually get to delivery. And I think Agile was meant to address the learning that happens during that period of building. You're not only learning about the code base that you're building, and you're discovering things about the code base that you couldn't have predicted, and so you want to be able to change that code base quickly, but you're also learning more about how your customers and your business are thinking about the value that you're trying to drive. And as you're learning about that, and as that value proposition changes over time, you need to be able to adapt to that as well. And that's what Agile is structured to allow you to do.
Great. Garima, do you have anything to add on to that? I heard the words adaptation, and I think to me that's really important, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. What does it mean for a business to have agility?
Right, and this is a multi-dimensional, has a multi-dimensional meaning. And, you know, my experience comes from large, complex organizations, and I can put some perspectives around when I started working with entrepreneurs and startup ecosystem. What I got to know is that, you know, business agility actually goes beyond team or technical agility. It's beyond that working software. You know, when you talk about agile with a big A and a manifesto, a lot of focus has been put around working software, you know, how to deliver working software. But when we talk about business agility, it's more than that. And to me, my understanding, how, you know, there are various definitions available in various contexts where you can find more information about business agility. But for me, why this discussion today is very important is that I think that business agility has 3 aspects. The first aspect is, how do you rethink your operating model? And I'll elaborate during the conversation what I mean by that. The second aspect is long-term resiliency. And that's where, you know, practices like SRE will, you know, come, you know, forward and support your organization to have that value feedback loop, the data-driven approach. And the third thing is your growth strategy. Growth strategy in terms of, you know, how are you looking at your continuous product canvas, and how are you aligning it with something which is commercially viable. So we'll talk about this during the discussion, but to me, business agility must have focus on these 3 things. And then you can talk about various aspects and how you can unify and synergize it piece by piece, or, you know, in an approach where, you know, whatever your organization or maturity level is.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you for that. Yeah, so both of you spoke about delivering value. And I think delivering value quickly is maybe where the term agility really hits home. If you think of like physical agility, it's how well can you respond to changes in your environment? How well can you change your path? How quickly can you move ideas or move directions? Because if it takes you 7 to 10 years to go from a business idea into actually delivering value, clearly the market, your customers, everything has changed around you such that what was originally your value proposition is probably not even correct anymore. And the likelihood that you're actually delivering on that value proposition is very low 7 to 10 years later. So I think that really brings us to our first major topic. There's a great blog post that Garima wrote about continuous product-oriented practices. And one of the things that I've heard you talk about several times now is creating a short path or the shortest path to realizing value. And a lot of companies these days are reorganizing themselves and reorienting themselves on delivering value instead of just producing outputs. So waterfall can be thought of as just like delivering various pieces of written documentation and shifting it amongst people until at the end somehow software ends up being birthed. I'm interested, like you said, in reliability and reliability engineering because in the modern software development lifecycle, the flow of value tends to be thought of as being finished when you deliver something into production. And I see reliability engineering as continuing this path and thinking about value in actuality as when customers interact with your written software. And so you must have resilience and reliability in order for them to interact and deliver or derive value from your software. Are there any other ways that you see kind of reliability as impacting the flow of value? Or are there other things after delivery that we might also include in models for the flow of value? I'll start with Garima.
Right. So to start off with, when we talk about flow of value, I think the concept of value itself is very challenging and overwhelming because a lot of people in organizations, and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs as well, they find it very difficult to quantify what is the value. So basically, it's essential and important to have a value radar. And we take guidance from project to product. That's the kind of mindset which we have in the continuous product oriented practice. So basically we focus on four things: features, risks, depths, and defects. So your features will create value, but your defects, risks, and depth which you're creating will also have to be part of your value radar. If you don't integrate them and overlook them, that will create bottlenecks and friction at the end. So I think what is important to understand that reliability is one of the components of your value radar. And how do you actually measure that value throughout in a unified way by designing some matrices is a challenge. So that is where you have to kind of look at these four aspects and try to kind of integrate this in the entire value chain. That's where you will be able to identify the flow, expedite and speed up where the gaps are. And of course, do not deliver value, over deliver value to the customer. So that's also essential and important. So if you want to have a quick time to market, you have to assess what kind of risk and liabilities you are carrying by just not over delivering value.
What's an example of over delivering value?
So I'll give you some examples. So I talk to entrepreneurs in an ongoing basis, right? So I was talking to one of the entrepreneurs who's actually developing and envisioning to deliver experiential news. Now, when you start kind of deciphering that idea, and you want to put like perspectives around what kind of features you would have, what is your minimum viable product you want to kind of go into the market with, you need to have a user segmentation in mind. If you don't have a clustering of user segmentation, you don't have a strategy how you can build quick those features and get validation through your value feedback loops, then it will be a problem for you at the end, howsoever good idea it is. So what I have found out, and I gave you one example, and I'll also give you some examples of entrepreneurs. I have kind of interacted with is there are 3 types of entrepreneurs in this ecosystem. One at the inception stages, where they have this emotional journey of being connected to that idea and being kind of deciphering that idea and making it big. But what they fall out in that journey, throughout this journey, is that they fail to build enough consensus with the investors, with the shareholders, to kind of put that idea into the market. And that's I have talked to several entrepreneurs in that domain. The second life cycle, what we have seen is that entrepreneurs who are actually able to ship the product out, but they are having challenges building consensus with their own team. So how the UX design team should work with that feature, how the development team should work, what kind of incremental funding investments you need for developing this particular feature against another feature. So that's where a lot of entrepreneurs are getting stuck. And we kind of interact with them on an ongoing basis, and simplifying that value radar, making it measurable, always help people to build consensus. The third and the last part is when people launch their products and then they say, okay, now we have launched the product, but the job has not ended. The job has just started, because you have so many other ideas and you will be overwhelmed with the features you have, right? So how do you fine tune your product values? How do you fine tune your product canvas is another challenge. And there where you have to have that bigger picture view of what flow matrices are you having, and how do you ensure that you build reliability as one of the value components.
Awesome. Great answer. We'll definitely be talking about collaboration later. That was something that I heard from your answer. And one of the other things that was really interesting is the idea of incremental funding. I think if we have time, I'd love to talk on that, because to me, that's one of those practices that comes with business agility beyond just like software development agility, which is where kind of the Agile movement came originally. But in order to be truly agile as a business, you need to combine and look at the agility of all of your business systems, including how you fund projects. That'll be an interesting thing that hopefully we can touch on during our Q&A. Jason, I'd like to open up some of the same questions to you. Where do you see reliability as kind of fitting in to the concept of delivery of value?
Yeah, I mean, I think Garima said, the job doesn't stop at delivering software, right? Our goal is not to deliver software. Our goal is to have a functioning business that provides value to humans and that provides value back to the company that we're working with, right? And so if we allow our development teams, allow our product teams to think, okay, I do this for a little while and then I push to prod and then I wash my hands and I walk away, that's output-oriented thinking, right? Like that is exactly the antithesis of how we want to think about delivering products, because nobody cares about technology. I don't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to use my iPhone today. I wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to check the weather, right? And if I just had an iPhone in my hand, but it didn't actually do anything for me, that, like the technology people could be very happy. Apple could be very happy that I spent $800 or whatever they are now. But I'm not going to be very happy, right? And so I think if we can get to a place where our business as a whole And that includes what we would typically call the business, but also the product development teams, the people who are actually banging on keyboards, making these products real. If we can get them all to align on the fact that their job is not to deliver code, their job is to deliver value. And nobody gets to pat themselves on the back if they ship something that doesn't provide any value. So I think you had said, like, what is it about after delivery? I think there is no after delivery. Like, continuous delivery is a thing for a reason. Like, when you've got a SaaS product, especially, like, you're always building. And I don't know how familiar people are with models like the Kano model, but it's a model that shows how the perception of feature value changes over time, right? And so initially, when you look at this, it's Kano. You can Google it, and there's images. Initially, there might be product features that customers consider to be delighters, and other product features that customers consider to be baseline. Like, your thing has to do this, or it's just not even a viable product, right? And the concept of the model shows that over time, features that were originally considered to be delighters on the map move towards a more commoditized place. So what was once a delighter becomes a baseline feature. And that means if you don't want your product to just go slide downhill into a commodity space where the only place you can fight is over price, which is a race to the bottom, right? You have to be continually understanding your customer's perception of value, like I said before, so that you can include those delighter features and keep sort of building on that. And hopefully you're removing things from your product as well. I think as a PM, my favorite moment is when I have clients who delete things from their backlog or delete things from their code base, which I think doesn't happen enough. But
as an engineer, I will say that is also some of my favorite things. Doesn't happen probably as often as it should, but not using something because it's no longer providing value is part of the reaping process of practicing a value-oriented practice. I would love to talk about kind of producing value versus producing outputs. I know that companies will often undergo a transformation in order to reorient themselves from producing outputs to producing value. Oftentimes, we get stuck in systems where the only way we know how to operate is just by, I do the work that's in front of me, I write the code that's in front of me, I throw it over the wall. And like you said, that hampers our ability to remain agile. It hampers our ability to think of value delivery as a whole and to respond to changes and then deliver new value based on those changes. So I know, Jason, you had co-founded the innovation and transformation practice back at Pivotal. And when a company sees the writing on the wall, they often try and buy a transformation off the shelf. I'm kind of interested in your take on, can a company buy a transformation?
No. I mean, that was a yes/no question, so I give you a no answer. But I mean, if you could buy a large volume of humans who understand, believe in, advocate for, and make decisions that are aligned with your vision of that transformation, if you could just buy this giant team of people who were capable of doing this, then yeah, you can buy a transformation. And some companies try that, right? Some companies will acquire an organization in order to bring them a capability that they don't already have. And, you know, depending on how they treat that acquisition, that can go well or it can not go so well. But ultimately, I think that transformations are not about technology. They're about the humans, and the humans have to understand and believe in what you're moving towards. Otherwise, nothing changes. And I think, you know, we've seen fad transformations 1,000 times over, and yeah, they only work if people believe it.
Yeah. Garima?
Yes, and I would like to agree with whatever Jason has said, and also bring one more context to it, which I started with, is when we talk about business agility, we also have to talk about, rethinking your operating models. Until and unless when you start steering these transformation, either outside in or inside out, you need to change the rules of the game, and you need to bring in new business models. So the transformations which we do is having a purpose, a reason, right? So, your transformation should be able to bring in new capabilities in the organization. Your transformation should be focused on the people assets. Your transformation should be aware that every organization will have unique challenges, right? And today's transformation, I would say, are becoming more and more challenging because there is no I would say limited, not no, but limited support from a literature perspective, how to do these transformation, which are experiential in nature, which are based on like newer practices like SRE and DevOps. So every organization has to explore opportunities, potential of those transformations which they are doing. And they're in the process, what is happening is that these transformations are becoming short in cycles, and they are incremental. Also, they're based on experimentation, failures, and creating new knowledge and new learnings. So basically, that new knowledge and new learning created will have to be adopted in the organization, and it becomes easier from a certain extent when these transformations are inside out. So that's the reason why you see a lot of transformations are happening within the organization. But I don't deny the fact that you cannot bring people from outside, but you will only be able to bring when you change the rule of the game. You have to bring them as partners. You cannot bring them as vendors. So that's how I would see, and I think that will require a lot of maturity. We will see this happening, but not now, maybe in 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, that hits very close to home about being a partner in someone's transformation. Our most recent webinar was actually also just about transformation and the idea of SRE as being an organizational transformation effort. One of the things that I think people dislike about Big A Agile, or why it's even called Big A Agile, is because leadership will see the writing on the wall, see that something needs to change. And so they'll choose a practice off the shelf and they'll kind of impose it on an entire organization. And then it becomes more and more about how well are you practicing the thing, as opposed to how well are you kind of unlocking the outcomes that were the reason why the organization was interested in transforming, period. And I know that some of our ICs in the audience or any of our attendees might actually be a part of an organization that's currently undergoing this kind of thing transformation potentially. And I'm interested if either of you have any advice. How can someone who is a part of a transformation movement hold leadership accountable to not doing it thing oriented, but instead doing it outcome oriented?
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I mean, because first, people have to be capable of discerning the difference between an output and an outcome. And I think a lot of people have never been in a place where they really had to think about that. Most people, for most of our working lives, like corporate America, the corporate West is based on factory-like principles. Right? Like you are assigned work, you do the work, you throw the work over the wall, you get paid, right? It's a very simple equation. And there isn't a lot of responsibility for the value on the other side of that wall, right? Which we kind of keep coming back to. And when you don't have that responsibility kind of inherent in the work that you do, people tend not to think about it. They tend to think about like, I have to do X thing, by the end of the week, right? That's my job. And that again is output oriented thinking, right? So one of the exercises that we do with people is we have a little worksheet that has a mix of statements on it that are outputs and outcomes, and we have people like check a box next to the statement. Is this an output or is it an outcome? And it's about 15, 20 things on this list, and people go through and they read and they check the boxes, and then we have a conversation afterwards and we talk through each one. And it's really enlightening for people to like see that thing that they've always been working towards, like, actually is just a thing, as you put it, right? And these transformations that you describe as thing-oriented transformations are really, again, about sort of enacting the ritual of transformation without necessarily understanding the value that you're trying to drive. And I think that, again, being really pragmatic, you can do any kind of ritual you want. That part doesn't matter at all, as long as it gets you to the outcome that you're trying to achieve.
Right, and I agree with whatever, Jason, you have said, and I cannot, put other words to it. But I also want to kind of bring one other perspective, because when I belong to a complex, large organization, and when you start actually a dialogue with leadership, I think it's also, how you make them successful with this discussion about output and outcome and why people are output driven. So what we essentially do is, I would look at it that how will you reduce the cost of each value point. Let's have a discussion on that. Because once you actually put some kind of tangible valued items where your stakeholders belong, then it becomes a more easier discussion. And then you can discuss about value, what it means for an organization, how you will reduce the cost of that value over a period of time, which will also require like a certain set of understanding around financial modeling of your capital structure you have, your incentives, how do you build those incentives for shared goals and objectives, and lastly, how do you generate value for the shareholders in continuum. So that's where you will get buy-in and support from the leadership if you start steering their goals and objectives into the outcome you are actually trying to build or generate.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, really working with leadership to get them to reorient their own thinking towards outcome thinking as opposed to output thinking, and really allowing them to tie what they know about and what they think about, which is like cost and financial modeling and investment in things, and using that to instead understand what's the cost to deliver value as opposed to what's the cost to deliver this output, right? It opens up this wonderful world where everyone's actually aligned finally on what it means to be delivering value and what the risks are to deliver value and what the cost is to deliver value. Thank you all for that. I'd like to move us kind of back into the SRE space or the reliability space. One of the things that reliability engineering or SRE practices has taught people is the importance of managing production incidents. They happen anytime you've released software. You end up finding out that one of your customers has degraded service. One of your customers can't derive value from your product. And in the old days, that was handled by a support engineer or an on-call ops person who was oftentimes siloed from the rest of the organization. And a lot of maturity in the SRE space is rethinking those models, is rethinking how production incidents work, how people are communicating to each other and to customers. And one really interesting thing that I've seen in the SRE space is that the crisis that's generated from a production incident actually kind of clears away organizational silos. And so you end up co-locating people in a war room, for instance, to handle a production incident. And it doesn't matter your seniority, it doesn't matter your reporting structure. And we had spoken briefly about collaboration earlier. I would call what is generated out of this a balanced team approach, or a collaborative model. So I'm wondering, can either of you really talk to what does collaboration really mean functionally, and how does SRE or this kind of production incident help us think about collaboration?
Okay, I can go first this time, and I was thinking about how to put my perspective, and I think I want to connect the SRE practices, the collaboration which is happening from where operations, teams and people, they're seeing large interest in collaboration. So I think there are two things which are evident. Collaboration happens when there is a shared goal and objective, right? So when there is an incident or an SLA breach, everybody is impacted, right? So I think that understanding and awareness and practices like SRE, building up those kind of budgets and error budget policies would help you align the organization and coming together in one way. And I also have seen that practices like observability, which builds predictability in your own operational space, would also stitch the gaps and bring people together. So I think these kind of new modern practices, they are kind of helping us to collaborate better. I also refer to one more aspect which I have lately seen has picked up, but it has a big value when we talk about it in the context of site reliability engineering. That's value stream mapping. When you think about value stream mapping and connecting that dot with how you build your error budgets, error policies, how your SLAs are contracted, those kind of aspects, if you integrate and come together and build a modern contract around this with your users, with your customers, with your stakeholders, that will naturally help your teams to work together and kind of create an organization where you will be able to burn your ships towards functional silos, which we have created in the past.
Great. Jason, how would you talk about balanced team or collaboration?
Yeah, well, I mean, first, I think what Garima said about, and this is coming out as like a common theme, I think. Garima mentioned these crisis moments causing teams to recognize that they have a shared goal, right? And it seems like, and then you followed up actually with other things about alignment. And I think alignment is really kind of a core theme to all of these transformative efforts, right? And to working together. I mean, collaboration ultimately, if you abstract a level, collaboration is about alignment as well, right? So anyway, I just thought that was cool to kind of see that coming through. So you mentioned these crisis moments where people come together and they deliver together in ways that they might not normally do that. We break those organizational silos, and you related that to balanced team. I think there are two things to talk about here. One, yes, that's what balanced team looks like. If we think about extreme programming, which is a flavor of agile software development, they looked at practices of software development like writing tests. And they said, okay, if writing tests is good, why don't we write tests all the time? Okay, so we're going to do test-driven development now. Or they looked at code reviews and they said, if code reviews are good, why don't we do code reviews all day, every day? And so we'll do pair programming, right? This is analogous to we see a team come together in a crisis moment in a way that we don't normally see them come together, and they go in and they crush that crisis. Well, if that's good, why don't we do that all the time, right? Why shouldn't our operating model normally be we all work together with no silos? We've got PMs, designers, engineers, business people, marketing people, whoever needs to be there in order to drive the value that we're trying to drive should be there. And balanced team has been around as a concept for a long time. It's like capital B, capital T. There is a website, I think balancedteam.org. Been around for 12, 15 years, it started with a fairly small group of people who were trying to think about how can we actually incorporate product management and design into Agile engineering? Because as Agile was first starting up, it was a very engineering focused practice. And that's where this concept of balanced team came from. And there were one of the early members of that group was a guy named Tim McCoy. And he coined this term product stewardship in contrast to product ownership. Right. And product stewardship is about all of us being aligned on the value we're trying to deliver with our product, and all of us from our different roles contributing from our different roles, but to steward that value with the product. So I think that's kind of the core of what Balanced Team is about. And again, you know, if a thing works well in a crisis, you know, maybe it works well all the time. I think one of the things that crisis mode triggers is a reevaluation of risk, right? Because suddenly there's one thing that really matters, and there's a whole lot of other stuff that just doesn't matter that much. And so it's easier to break down those silos because all of the risks that we ascribe to working together in this way is subordinated to the current, like we've got a tiger in our face and we have to like deal with that tiger right now, and all these other little cats around here, they don't matter. And I think maybe that's an opportunity for us all to go, maybe those other cats don't matter kind of all the time. Some of them might be on the big side, you know, there might be a lynx in there somewhere. We want to watch out for the lynx or the mountain lion, but like none of them are really the tigers that we thought they were. So
yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, for me, I see, you know, the balanced teams, XP practices, agile practices, starting with engineering, then really being driven to adopt product and design as part of their balanced teams. Then people went even further and said, you know, what about bringing business folks in? What about bringing marketing folks in? We've heard the terms like shift left, and that has been ascribed to various transformational movements. In DevOps, for instance, it was shift ops left, shift security left, which really just means about bringing them in earlier into the process. And bringing them in earlier is really just another way to say have them collaborate sooner and earlier. So instead of the traditional software development model, once again, as being like product delivers an output to design, which delivers an output to engineering, which delivers an output to our operational folks, why don't you just start with all of those folks in the same room, talking to each other every single day, working on incremental slices of value and delivering them. And to me, that's really what these production incidents do, is you suddenly get a customer support person in the same room, as someone from sales who's in the same room, as your communications and marketing manager is in the same room, as a back-end engineer is in the same room. So it really acts as this aligning function where suddenly you're aligned on like, oh yeah, it turns out that that piece of software that we wrote actually does deliver value to our customers. And what was the value that it delivered to customers? And are we continuing to deliver that value if they are unable to access it? So I think we've going to move into our Q&A section now. So any of our attendees, if you would like to use the Q&A portion, feel free to ask us a question and we will answer it right now. So I have a question from Carl that says, I'm assuming this is towards Garima, how do you define debt in context? So you were talking earlier about, I believe it was kind of a value framework, and you were thinking about including risks and including debt when you're looking at a particular value stream. What do you mean by debt?
Yeah, thank you. I will actually try to explain my views on what debt means in this context. Is how I have visualized that debt is created by temporized workaround solutions, which are created for quick product decisions or product shipment, or maybe it's solving some kind of a urgent issue, and that's how you kind of lift up your debts and you continue to cascade and build it up. I would like that it's an important aspect of your product, and it should not be overlooked. It should be part of your value design matrix. And with that, we also have to focus on risks and the other aspects of feature delivery. So that's where technical depths kind of grow, and it builds up.
Yeah, my understanding from what you were talking about was like, if you are trying to have an accurate portrayal of the value of a particular engineering solution, you can't, when you're doing accounting principles, you can't just look at the value without also looking at the costs or the potential costs. And risk is one of those potential costs. And any built up either technical debt or any other form of debt is another one of those potential costs where you need the holistic picture in order to understand a particular feature.
Yeah, that's correct. And it is also tightly connected with your value delivery, because all the risk, depths, and defects which you are actually creating will create zero value to the end user. It's something which you have to get rid of, because it's kind of overcoming the risk, overcoming the bottlenecks for reducing the shippable time of the product. The features are the ones which create value, and that's where your teams have to focus. But without actually having that clear identification and view and strategy on how you will reduce depths, risks, and defects, you will not be able to achieve that.
Thank you. We've got a question from John Rakowski that says, thanks for the explanation on product stewardship. Question, what are the panelists' thoughts on the importance of observability in regards to product stewardship? Jason, maybe?
I mean, I'm not actually that well versed on what is meant by observability. I have assumptions about that.
What are your assumptions?
My assumptions are that it's around performance, that it's like, how is your site performing from an engineering perspective, which I think is different from how is your site performing from a product perspective, although related, obviously, because if your thing doesn't work, then you're not delivering value, which I think is the whole point of SRE, right? So sorry, I'm trying to read.
Yeah, it says, or the importance of monitoring.
Sure. So, and monitoring, again, I think is about stability, right? And the tool actually being live and functioning, and people being able to access it. So how does that relate to product stewardship? I think historically, we haven't thought enough about that, right? I think that even from an enlightened sort of product management perspective, we still think more about our customer-oriented metrics than we do about the performance of the actual site. And the clients that I have right now have tools that literally lives hang in the balance on whether these tools function or not. And so we've had to retool our product thinking to think not just about can the user do the thing that we want the user to do in the interface, but can the user do the thing that we want them to do because the product is actually available for them to do it, right? And we've had to think up some pretty tricky mitigations for communications lines being down or things like that. Like how do you manage a cloud-based tool when you're severed from the cloud, or things like that. And that's been a new thing for us. And I think it's probably new thinking for a lot of people. I think there's still been a bit of a disconnect between sort of product thinking and the site reliability side. we leave that to the operators, right? They get to monitor stuff. That's their job. But I feel like that's just throwing value over another fence. And I don't think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Right, and I want to add something here, and I give you a simple analogy towards a question which was asked. So and this is a real life example. So when my daughter was born and she was really kind of young, like 6 months old, I used to monitor her. And I used to monitor her on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, on even seconds, right? But now she's 6 years old. So neither I have the need to monitor her, nor she requires to be monitored. What I do is I observe. I put observability that, okay, now I would let her do her job, but we are observing if something happens externally, which is showing the sign that something I need to intervene with. So it's the same kind of concept. If you put from a software perspective, if your product is nimble, it's in the inception stages, you would rather prefer to have monitoring rather than observability. But when you actually grow a little more mature, you will trust the product itself, and you can bring observability, and you can bring those components where it also becomes a mechanism for you to assess the maturity of the product, maturity of your design practices, architecture, and that's where I think a lot of value is created.
Yeah. Yeah, I see this in the way where we talk about how do you slice the pyramid? Do you slice it horizontally or do you slice it vertically? We used to operate for such a long time where the product was built, and then after it was built, you cared about the quality of the product. And so you wrote tests after, or you started doing tests after. And then the next thing that you did after you did quality was you maybe thought about monitoring solutions. And so you hooked up some metrics to it. And so all of these things that happened after the fact, you did security after the fact. And that was all part of your production readiness checklist. And these days, observability is a key portion of appropriate product stewardship. Your product stewardship must include an observability strategy that you actually think about as part of the inception of a product or inception of a value stream. Because like we've said, shifting left does wonders for both alignment and also ensuring that you're not going to get caught in a situation that's really uncomfortable later when you realize that you didn't include observability or monitoring solutions, and now you have a production incident and you have no way of seeing what went wrong or doing a deep dive into it other than getting an engineer to kind of jump directly into the code. So being more proactive about resilience and reliability is really, I would say, a key component of modern product stewardship. I think we have maybe time for one more question. I want to make sure that people can leave a little bit early. And I actually wanted to come back to the idea of incremental funding, which we spoke on briefly before. What is incremental funding, or why is it an interesting practice that actually unlocks business agility? And what is it compared to, for instance?
Right, and I hope that this question is towards me. So I will start, and then Jason, I would like to have your views as well. So to me, actually, when you talk about incremental funding or the capital structures or the commercial strategy, they're all connected, right? What needs to happen is we need to have some kind of data-driven decision points, some kind of data stories which you can create where you can translate your decision-making into an incremental funding model. And that is where, a lot of companies are kind of talking about building a data strategy. So that's a prerequisite. When you talk about incremental funding model, you will have to look at what is the data-driven strategy you have in the organization. How do you interpret that data? What kind of data stories you have? Where can you bring those data stories to the leadership team? And from a leadership perspective, I think it's equally important not only to build a capital structure which which is incremental in nature, but also how to put that commercial strategy in place, which is directly connected to your MVPs. You'll have to justify that what is the return of investment of this particular MVP which you have created. If we get to a stage where we are all accountable for putting together these data stories and data points, I think we will be able to steer incremental funding and breaking down the capital structure silos which we have created from the past.
Great. I want to make sure we actually kind of define what incremental funding is versus what it used to be. And I'll pose that to Jason when you talk about your answer.
Yeah, sure. Well, so incremental funding stands in contrast to something like annual budgeting or things like that, where you might say, well, we're going to give this team, X amount of money for a year or 2 years or 3 or 5. Right. And then we're not going to think about it. And incremental funding, where I come from with this take is from the sort of Eric Ries School of Lean Startup, the David Kidder and Eric Ries worked together at General Electric, implementing Lean Startup ideas there. And one of the things that they implemented was this concept of growth boards. And growth boards were intended to be a mechanism for doling out incremental funding in order to, really, it's all about prioritization in the end, in order to direct your funding towards things that were being successful and not waste your money on things that are not being successful. So the concept came from venture funding, right, with startups. So you've got a venture fund, you're going to meet with a bunch of startups and you're going to say, you know what, I'm willing to drop 250K there. I'm going to put 500K there and $1 million there. And that gives each of those startups some runway, right? It gives them space to work. So they go and spend that money. And in a few months, they're going to come back and they're going to say, okay, we're ready for another round, right? But they have to prove to you as an investor that what they've been working on has actually been moving them forward. Right. And this gets to some of the value metrics that Garima talked about there, that they need to demonstrate that they're on the right path. And what so often happens with large enterprise is that a project gets conceived and sanctioned and budgeted and then ignored. And projects that are not generating any value can go on for years, sucking away resources from the organization that could be spent doing things that actually matter. And so I think when Eric and David were sort of pioneering these concepts at GE, they were really thinking about how can we concentrate capital in the places where it matters and stop spending money on zombie projects. How can we kill the zombies? So I guess that's my take.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that answer. I think that puts us at time. I'd like to thank all of our attendees for showing up. I'd like to thank our panelists for participating. Thank you everyone for joining us for this wonderful hour, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Bye everyone.
Thanks all.